our first question this week is from a listener named Josh. He asked, how important is it to stick to a specific structure of eating, exercise, sleep? And is it something that can be flexible, or should it be like stick to the schedule, plan, commit, never change?
Josh, thank you for that question. I'm going to give the typical answer of it depends, but then I'll
Classic.
follow up on the what
Classic.
it depends on. So it depends on what is your goal and what is the time frame for that goal. So if you have, let's say you have like a 5K coming up a month from now, it's pretty important that you're sticking to your nutrition plan. You're getting enough carbs in, you're getting enough sleep, you're getting enough training, you're building up volume to get ready for that race.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if it's further out, then there's more wiggle room. So it's going to depend on what's the goal. It's going to depend on what's the thing that's being used. Because what I will say, kind of getting into nutrition a little bit, is that any short term change in a diet is going to work, right? This is why we see the carnivore diet, people do extremely well on it. We see people do extremely well on a plant based diet, although they're completely different ends of the spectrum. We see people doing well with just eating raw liver meat. We see people doing well with paleo. We see people doing well with not a sugar diet. We see people doing well with just a sugar diet. So you start to ask the question, how could all of these diets be successful? And the reason is because people are probably on it for such short period of time that any short-term change will happen when you make any change into the system. But if you want to see the long-term impacts of it, then you have to stick with it. So then getting into exercise, if you want to be on a good weight loss program, that tends to be losing maybe 1 pound to 2 pounds per week. If you do a crash one where in like 2 weeks you lose 20 pounds, that weight's going to come back and probably come back even further because you didn't regulate metabolism, you didn't make the long-term changes or habit development that was needed for it. So how important is it that you stick to a specific plan? Well, it depends on what the goal is and what that plan is, what you're trying to get from that plan. Back a while ago when this Netflix documentary came out on plant-based diets and how this plant-based diet can change your sports performance and all of these other things that it came up with, I was like, wow, I should try that. And I did for 2 months and I felt great. I felt phenomenal. But then month 3 and 4, I felt absolutely terrible because 1, I wasn't getting enough calories in total. And 2, those first initial months where my body's just adapting to something new and almost detoxing from all the meat that I had beforehand. It doesn't mean that meat was bad. It just means my body was adapting to that change short term, but then long term, I didn't have the things that I needed to actually perform. So back to that question of how important is it to stick with things? It depends on the goal. It also depends on the season of life that you're in. We were on a previous podcast with Jason and Lauren Pack, and they talk about dimmers, which I think is a great way to put it. That, you know, it's hard every week to get 5 days of exercise in. Some weeks you're going to be able to get more. Some weeks you're going to be able to get less. We traveled a lot for the 4th of July. This week is not a 5 exercise week. You know, it's the dimmer. We had to turn that dimmer down a little bit because the dimmer on family and travel was turned up. So I do think you need to allow some fluctuations to happen because that's going to allow you to stay long term. It's just after that dimmer's down, make sure that it does come back up relatively soon.
I love that. And I look at my personal journey, my personal story. I went from having being a vegetarian for 7 years, and those last few years of that having a pretty serious eating disorder. And I was in such a structure, but then when I started going through recovery, I had to stay in a structure for a while, actually. Like, my nutritionist was telling me what to eat, when to eat it, committing to only like 15 minutes of very light exercise, and prioritizing sleep for the first time in my life. And so I had to stick to that structure for a while in order to help heal. But then when I was on the other side of that healing, I didn't pendulum swing, but I had the freedom to be like, okay, I can be a little loose with this. I can have snacks. I can be excited when I have ice cream again for the first time, rather than hating it and hating myself because of having ice cream and things like that. And so then, not that it was a huge pendulum swing, but there was like more freedom where I didn't have to be in this crazy structure. But now I'm more intentional as an athlete, and I want to continue to grow as an athlete in a new way. And so I'm kind of more in the middle, where I was preparing for a competition and I was pretty strict with what I was doing. But now I'm post competition, keeping most of those habits. But we had ice cream basically 2 days a row in this past week, and it was awesome, and I loved it. And so definitely like it is like what are your goals, but then there's also flexibility within it. And I love the analogy of the dimmer.